Welcome to this Hive Minds session on experience of citizen science and community research. My name is Sian White and I'm Head of Strategic Design and Insight with Institute of Community Studies and the Young Foundation. And for those of you that have not attended a Hive Minds before, these are a series of online webinars that we do from time to time that explore news and issues and views on participatory research. And as I've said, this one's going to be primarily thinking here about citizen science and experiences of community research. So I'll shortly welcome and introduce the format for this event, including we've got a range of interesting speakers today to get to talk to you about their work. But if we go to the next slide, Alice, that's better, great, lovely. But for those of you that don't know as much about our work, so we are the Institute for Community Studies, and we've been working really closely with UK Research Innovation on the delivery of the Community Science Collaboration Grants. But we are an institute that attempts to do a new kind of research, and we have people at our heart. So we're powered by the non-profit organisation, the Young Foundation, and our work aims to change and explore and bridge the gap between communities, people and policy makers in the work that we do. So today's session, if we go to the next slide, is going to be the first over the series the next couple of months of a discussion series that explores some of the learnings, experiences and reflections of UKRI funded citizen science collaboration grants. Now, some of you might have attended some of our sessions last year that explored early findings from these grants that have been funded to explore the boundaries around citizen science and try new ways of collaborating with a range of partners and also with communities and people in a range of locations across the country. And these citizen science collaboration grants take a whole range of different ways of thinking about citizen science across a range of subjects, so from environmental science to history to health, and really look at taking that broad idea of how we can think about citizen science and what it means to do it well and what it takes to do it well. And so we are opening up today a series of discussion papers that will be launched over the next couple of months that take some of the learning and explorations around actually what have we learned from this programme of different grants and collaborations. And the aim of this is really to start a conversation about actually what have we learned from this programme, but what does that mean in the wider system? How does that relate to what you understand from your work around participatory research, and also the concept of actually what that might mean if we were to do more citizen science and participatory research across the sector. And this first discussion series is focused on experience of citizen science. So if we go to the next slide, Alice. Thank you. So first of all, we wanted to start off this discussion series by really reflecting on actually what does it mean and how's the experience of undertaking work such as citizen science? What does it mean? What does it feel like? And doing that from a range of perspectives from those that are involved in its practice. And so what you'll hear today is a range of perspectives about actually what does it take and what does it feel to do citizen science? Now, to start us off, I am going to say a little bit about actually how we're terming that term citizen science, and recognising that there are lots of different definitions and different ways of understanding it. We're going to hold that definition today quite loosely and recognise it as a kind of a loose term that helps to bring together what is a host of methods and tools where the public and communities can participate in research across a range of disciplines. We recognise that for some, that term is really helpful. For others, it might be less helpful and it might not quite capture what you're doing. But we hope from the room today, we have a range of people that are interested in that term and also interested more broadly in thinking about participatory research and what it means to get communities to be able to be involved to the best ability within research, within academia and beyond. Also recognising that you might hear a couple of different terms. So we don't always talk about citizen scientists. We do also talk about youth researchers and peer research as we think about this broader practice here of participatory and community research. But regardless of the definition we use, we hope that there'll be something of interest to you today as we explore this topic. So in terms of kind of what we will cover in the format of today's webinar, if we go to the next slide, Alice. Thank you. We're going to have a conversation in two parts. So the first part is we'll be opening up and introducing our discussion series and focusing in on this first paper in the series that focuses on experiences. So I will shortly introduce you to my colleague Alice Bell, a senior researcher at the Institute for Community Studies, who will take us through some of the key themes in our discussion paper, which is designed to get us thinking and talking today about actually what does it mean to do citizen science. I will then open up to two of our case studies from the Citizen Science Collaboration Grants Programme, who will be here today to talk more about their experience and perspective of what it's meant to do citizen science in their context. And we really welcome them here this morning. So following that, and really keeping to this truth about that we want to make sure this is a discussion as well as kind of sharing what we've learned, we will then hear from a range of perspectives. So from you, and offering up the opportunity to get your thoughts and reflections on some of the questions posed by our discussion paper and your reflections on the experience of doing citizen science. But also we will also go into smaller breakout rooms to give you the chance to dig in a bit deeper with other colleagues working in citizen science. So hopefully the first part will be a really interesting and rich, give you thoughts to kind of discuss later, and then we'll open up further to kind of discussion as we go through the series. So if we go to the next slide, Alice. Thank you. Now, hopefully we shall be giving you lots to think about in this room and plenty to attract your attention and keep you interested as we go through. But you can also, we've got two ways which you can also engage as well as in the room. So you might want to follow along online using the following hashtags and also email Twitter accounts to follow on through the conversation. And what we will also do, if we go to the next slide, is we're aware that we're going to be quite a big group today. So as a way of gauging and thinking a little bit about your experiences, we do have an online tool, Menti, to also capture a little bit of some of your experiences as well. So my colleague Alice will pop into the chat just shortly a link to this online tool, where throughout this morning you can go and add 3 words to describe your experience of citizen science. What does it mean to you? What have you found? And what does it mean for your practice? So we'll keep that live throughout the morning, and we'll come back to it later to see what's emerged from this group. I should also say, so we are recording this morning's session. So for the first 90 minutes or so, we will record it so that we make this available later on so that people can hear the speakers and the thoughts and discussions. For the second half of the event, it'll be focused more on the discussion. And so at that stage, we will stop the recording. Please note that it does mean that if you do come on camera and speak at any stage, this recording will be available and shared on our website and YouTube channel as well. So with all of that in mind, I want to get us quickly and swiftly into today's topic and conversation. And so I'm going to introduce at this stage then my colleague Alice, who is the primary author of today's paper, and she will take us through some of the key findings and thoughts to get us started and into discussion this morning. Alice, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Sian. So yeah, as Sian said, I'm Alice Bell, a senior researcher at the Institute, and I've been working with the CSCG, Citizen Science Collaboration Grants projects for the last couple of years. And in this section of the event, I'll share some of the key themes emerging from our first discussion paper. As Sian said, this focuses on the experience of what it means and feels like to be involved in citizen science. And it focuses on those 5 projects involved in the Collaboration Grants programme. What has been really great about bringing together that cohort and collaborating and learning from each other's collective experiences is that it provides an opportunity to explore how we do this type of research practice and what's needed from research design, institutions and funders to get this right as we deliver and experiment with different types of participatory research approaches. So our collaborative inquiry holds in its mind some cross-cutting questions, including the following 3 I have on the screen. So firstly, it asks about the nature of different types of citizen science and community-based research methods and how these compare to different types of research. Secondly, it looks at the barriers and enablers of participatory research, what institutions do and can do to help or maybe get in the way of this type of research. And finally, it asks about the broader implications of using participatory research methods to drive change across society. This all contributes to a wider body of work on delivering citizen science and community-based research methods. And for us, it specifically builds upon an evaluation the Institute did on lessons from UKY's previous Citizen Science Exploration Grants programme. This current series of papers has a commitment to exploring these questions from multiple perspectives. This involves actively working across disciplinary boundaries, but also critically incorporating the views and voices of citizen researchers involved in projects alongside those academic teams, public engagement professionals, and other partners and brokers involved in research. So the first paper naturally starts with the experiences of citizen science, and it highlights 3 key thematic areas, which I'll talk through next. So we start off looking at the relational nature of experiences, and this concerns the dynamics and relationships between different partners as they come together for a common research project. Secondly, we look at how these experiences are affective. So as projects go on journeys, working through and overcoming different challenges and opportunities as they pursue their objectives for the research, how those processes are imbued in feeling and emotion is what we interrogate there. And finally, we look at the powerful nature of experiences within citizen science and participatory research projects, how these interact with, both shape and reflect some of the structural dynamics of power across society. So the relational nature of experiences for the CSCG programme seem to be where much of the value of these participatory research methods lies. For the projects involved in this programme, bringing together different types of perspectives and viewpoints enabled a greater breadth of opinions, skills, experiences to be incorporated into the research projects. Across all parties involved, the sense of a shared endeavour contributing something greater than the sum of its parts emerges as a key benefit of participating in citizen science. Those projects involved in the CSCG programme aimed as far as possible to make these relationships mutually beneficial, moving beyond some of the transactional nature of relationships that we may typically see in research projects. Primarily, reciprocal learning and personal growth were identified as some of the key outcomes across all project stakeholders. But beyond this, academic researchers often sought tangible ways to recognise the citizen researchers' contributions, working within the parameters of their system to provide comparable recognition and acknowledgement to their professional contributions. For example, some looked at providing co-authorship, some paid their citizen scientists, provided other incentives, some were able to provide qualifications or an academic status within their university for citizen researchers. However, what was definitely apparent in this programme was that those academic teams involved had to be incredibly resourceful and find workarounds in order to provide these types of benefits, because university intellectual property and payment processes were not usually set up to support this type of working. This shows just one way that navigating some of the relationships and projects can be a balancing act. And it highlights that there's significant resource and effort required to co-produce flexible ways of working that effectively work across different groups and different needs, particularly balancing those citizen needs, often diverse groups within that, with the needs of a research project and those needs of an academic institution particularly. This sort of highlights in some ways some of the journeys people in the project have gone on both individually and collectively. And for the CSCG projects, a shared understanding emerged about participatory research feeling messy and complex. So as they navigate lots of moving parts, at points it may feel challenging or frustrating, but there's also this feeling that is really fun and rewarding, and the focus on method can enable creativity, innovation, and lots of opportunities to learn, adapt, and iterate, really pushing the boundaries of different research practices. But in departing from more established methods, we saw that those involved in projects carried a sense of responsibility, and that a level of risk was shaping their experiences. So the academic teams felt a strong sense of responsibility towards the citizen researchers to ensure they had positive experiences, even when there was external factors influencing this. They also carried a sense of responsibility to defend the integrity of their research processes, especially some of the more bureaucratic processes that surround research in institutions. For some, this had profound well-being impacts, which underlines the lack of suitable support available to researchers. And moreover, the entrenched precarity in the academic context is felt not really to reward this sense of risk that comes with innovating and trying to experiment and imagine the research process for the better. And this sort of highlights again how these experiences are situated in societal power structures and power relations and dynamics. Whilst we often talk about the positives of the empowering nature of citizen science and participatory research, we saw lots of multi-directional relations of power emerging through those different parties' experiences within the project. So whilst many citizen researchers told us they did feel empowered about the ability to contribute to change or discover more about their self and their capabilities, the citizen researchers also challenged the idea that they were previously disempowered, highlighting the skills and values that they could bring to the research process that they already had. And likewise, the academic researchers did not necessarily feel that they occupied powerful positions in all contexts, sharing feelings of vulnerability in some interactions with different collaborators in the project. In particular, the interactions with institutions perceived as powerful through research processes were talked about. So this might be universities, museums, health services, and communities' previous relationships and ongoing relationships with these institutions through the projects really mediate those conditions for co-production and participation. For some, elements of the projects were experienced as maybe exploitative or tokenistic, and also among both citizen researchers and academic researchers, issues of representation were highlighted, and particularly the lack of representation of minoritized ethnic researchers in all types of different contexts. Because of all of these dynamics, it was regularly highlighted how language matters because it reflects these types of power dynamics. So this term citizen science is a great example here. Citizenship as a concept is exclusionary in its nature. And likewise, the term science reflects hierarchies in the ways different types of knowledge are valued, and where knowledge is produced in professional contexts and with certain methods are typically deemed to be more credible than knowledge generated through communities. There was a desire among the CSCG cohort to avoid labelling groups and practices and move towards terms and concepts that invoke power sharing rather than hierarchies. But often in practice, it might be hard to predict what languages might be comprehensible or offensive to different audiences. And it really highlights the needs to take care and co-produce language use as far as possible. So in the paper, These themes are exemplified through short case studies highlighting the experiences of the 5 collaboration grant projects, and gladly we have 2 of them here today, so I'll pass to Sian to introduce them.
Brilliant. Thank you very much there, Alice, for introducing the discussion that we're going to have today and the themes from the paper. So as described, we are really glad to welcome 2 of the projects that have been funded by UKRI around citizen science to share their perspectives and the realities of what it means to do citizen science and what they found. So we'll start with a case study example from our Homes project, Homes Under a Microscope, which investigates the extent of microplastics in the home, working with citizen scientists to do this. And to start, we have 3 colleagues that will introduce Ben Williams, Margarita Sardo, and Ronnie Wright to talk about their experiences. But to give you a flavour of the programme and what it's meant to be part of this work, we'd love to play you a short video that puts their work in context. Some of you might have already seen this, but it talks about what does it mean to be a citizen scientist. And Alice hopefully will be able to shortly play the video.
The pilot scheme for the Homes Microplastics project aims to send out sample testing kits to citizen scientists in the community around Bristol, and they are going to test out 4 different microscopes to examine their sample dishes for microplastics that have settled onto them from their home.
Hi, are you Ronnie?
Hi, I am. Hi. I was interested in being part of the pilot scheme because I'm becoming more aware about the presence of microplastics everywhere. I just don't think we're aware enough of how much of that we're producing just by wearing things or opening packets. So I think anything which helps to demonstrate the sheer volume of waste is incredibly valuable.
You can have citizen research that essentially collects the data, and you just gather the data and bring it back and say thank you very much. To the co-creative citizen community research as we're doing in Homes, where citizens help you design and create the research itself and build that research landscape.
Once the citizens have taken their images and upload them, the samples will come back to me in the lab, and I will find their fibres underneath a microscope, and I'm going to use a technique called Raman spectroscopy to analyse those fibres and determine what the type of plastic is. What we're hoping to discover is what plastics are present in people's homes. We're going to try and work out what the sources of those plastics are. Maybe from them we can work out, is there a way to reduce microplastics going into the environment?
So hopefully that gives you a flavour of the work that's happened in this project. And now I'd love to open up to colleagues in this project to talk more about their perspectives and experiences. So can I start? Ben, can I hear a little bit more from you, a little bit about actually, for the Homes project, what's been your approach to the term kind of citizen science, and why are pilots been so important for you in working with this approach?
Thanks, Shannon. Morning, everyone. So building on experiences of previous projects, we wanted to reduce technological barriers to participation, enhance knowledge development across this subject. This is a fairly new subject, being microplastics in the air, and acknowledge that in this type of study, those that best placed to shape method designs are those typically applying them. So we wanted to bring all of that together, and again, thinking about where microplastics in the air might be is largely in people's homes, and it's not easy to go out and sample in everyone's homes on your own. You need that community participation to do that. So we wanted to bring all of this together. And again, to do this and learning from before, we noticed there's a motivational scale for participation. We wanted to work with those who are highly motivated to test methods, approaches and accessibility in a pilot, using those different types of microscopes that were flagged, which would then allow for wider accessibility to those who are, say, less motivated or are experiencing participatory barriers. So, for example, time to participate. That's essentially our approach. And just to give you an example, if you have a quick minute later, take out your phone, turn your camera on, zoom to the edge of your sleeve and see how easily clothes fragment, and imagine that happening throughout the day, non-stop in every room you're in. Thank you.
Thank you very much there, Ben, and thank you for that terrifying example that I'm sure all the people on the call will end up doing later as well, for putting that into context. So I'd love to come next to Margarita for her kind of perspective. So I guess the evaluative work has highlighted lots of learning from this project and the pilot process. I'd love if you could tell us a little bit more about that and what it's kind of meant.
Course. So we did quite a simple but meaningful evaluation of the project, and just some quick numbers across the pilot and rollout. The project engaged directly with around 145 citizen scientists. So in terms of numbers, we did quite well and we were very pleased with that. However, most of our citizen scientists were white, highly educated women. Initially, we put a lot of effort into targeting underrepresented groups. Excuse me, I have a very croaky voice. But despite all the efforts, our sample just wasn't very diverse. And this was one of our biggest learnings. That is, sometimes you put in a lot of time, energy, and effort into reaching specific demographics, but in the end, you can't force anyone to take part in a project. So as Ben said, we ended up with a lot of people that were highly motivated. Our other learnings were around motivations to take part. So the main motivation of home citizen scientists was contributing to research. And this, as a researcher, is super exciting for me. And overall, our citizens have seen an improvement in their knowledge, with the biggest increase of knowledge being in, excuse me, airborne microplastic knowledge. So that's really important as well. Our evaluation didn't focus only on the citizens, but also in exploring the journey and the experience of our researchers within the project. Holmes was made of mostly researchers that had little to no experience of citizen science projects. So the last learning that I would like to share with you is about that, the team overall. And by the end of the project, most of the team members had gained new skills. These were things such as managing people, improved communication skills, and increased knowledge around citizen participation, which is really wonderful to see again. And our researchers were able to identify what worked well, for instance, the co-creative element, an easy topic to engage citizens with, but also what didn't work so well, such as limited time to analyze samples and writing instructions for citizens. So overall, those were, I would say, our main findings.
Thank you very much there, and some of the highlights that are happening here in the chat as we go along. Thank you for sharing kind of the highlights of it, but also what's been harder, and particularly that consideration of how do we really think about the effort and the focus it takes to make sure that we involve a diverse range of people in citizen science. And so I'd next love to come on to Ronnie. You saw her there in the video talking about her experience of being a citizen scientist. But Ronnie, I'd love to hand the microphone over to you to talk a little bit about actually what's it meant to you to kind of be involved in this kind of pilot stage of the work. What have you gained from being involved?
It was, so I think I'm not somebody who's used to using stuff like microscopes and things. I think it was a simple project to be involved with, because really what we were doing was just leaving things out in the home and then seeing what happened. But it was actually quite exciting getting to use microscopes and try different microscopes out, and slightly disconcerting when, as well as the fibers, there was animals, but we'll leave that to one side. But it was so there was something quite exciting about being involved with something that I've got actually absolutely no experience of ever having done. I've never sort of counted myself as being somebody who was any good at science whatsoever. So there was something quite exciting about that. And I think the other element of what it did in terms of increasing my understanding of what exactly is going on in my own home, which it is horrific when you see what you're breathing in and what's around the house all the time, but also being able to talk to other people about that. And I think that engagement, that the knock-on effect of your involvement is also a really important one, that actually my engagement meant I talked to other people about it, and I carried on doing that. And I think other participants talked about, you know, other family members or their grandchildren being involved in also taking part in that, looking at things through the microscope. So there's a ripple effect that I think is also very valuable. And I think just the feeling that you've made a contribution to something that then ultimately could change how we view and deal with microplastics in the home is really, it's brilliant.
Thank you so much there, Ronnie. And I love that description there of the kind of the ripple effects and what it's meant for you and being able to get involved in something that you previously didn't know very much about. Brilliant. So this is our first kind of case study, and thank you to all our 3 speakers there. We will put in the link to the video and also where to find out further information about this project. I may well later welcome back our speakers if there's any kind of questions that we have. But for now, I'd love to turn to our second case study example from the CSCG grants programme, which has been exploring citizen science in a slightly different way. So I'm going to introduce colleagues working in Bristol for the Citizens Research and project. Oh, if everyone could just stay on mute, if that's okay, just for this section. So I'd like to introduce 3 colleagues. So Marianne Gonnet, Jessica Moody, and also Rebecca Dandre to speak to us about the work that they've been doing in Bristol. And this project overall is about working really closely with the people in project, including those from African and Caribbean communities, to address the history and contemporary legacies of transatlantic slavery within the city. And there's been a series of interlinked projects that have been happening within Bristol to explore this topic and this theme, using slightly different methods and approaches around citizen science. And what we're going to hear about primarily today is one of those strands, which has been about decolonising memory. And I'll wait for Jessica to say a little bit more about what this project has been about. But again, what we'd love to do is give you a flavour of this project by showing a short video, which is an example of what's emerged from this piece of work, and includes the idea of showing a memorial dance that was done on the UNESCO Day of Remembrance of Transatlantic Trade, and a dance that was done in the centre of Bristol to explore and commemorate this event. And so, Alice, if we can, it'd be great to show the video. Thank you very much there. So to put into context what the kind of short video that you've seen, I'd love to welcome Jessica to say a little bit more about this strand of work. Jessica, it'd be great if you could tell us more about the project, a little bit about the context behind the kind of video that we've just seen, and what you think's been valuable about the approach that you've taken to this work.
Hi everyone, thank you very much for the introduction and playing the video. So the Decolonising Memory project was led by community dance practitioners and artists Cleo Lake and Kwesi Johnson and myself, and focused on dance, movement and other creative methods to explore Bristol's history, memory and legacy of transatlantic enslavement from an African-centred perspective. So it centralised dance as a method, and this meant thinking about and valuing different kinds of knowledge, especially those that are more embodied, cultural and diasporic knowledge about both past and the present. And to do this project, we held 7 open workshops, mostly at the Malcolm X Community Centre in St Paul's, Bristol, with the option to join online, and we had monthly online meetings in between as well. And the workshops culminated in two major co-produced outputs. So the first you just saw a video of, which was a memorial folk dance, which has since been performed publicly across Bristol in different settings. And the second was an augmented reality mobile phone app, which takes visitors on an interactive and decolonised trail of Bristol city centre. And I think there is a lot of value in these kinds of collaborative citizen science kinds of projects, especially for our project. But today I just wanted to pull out two of those because I only have a little bit of time. Firstly, I think that involving citizen scientists meant a greater diversity of knowledge, experience, and perspectives. So we had people contributing to this project who were in their early 20s up to the over 80s, people from different ethnic backgrounds, and we had a majority of people of African heritage involved in this project. They were from different parts of the city and also beyond Bristol as well. Some people had a lot of knowledge about this topic, some came with very little, some were professional dancers, and some had no experience of dance at all. And I think also approaching our citizen science through dance and movement and other forms of creative practice opened up the project to people who might not otherwise have engaged with this topic or felt that they couldn't contribute towards knowledge or memorialization in this way. And my second point is that I think bringing people together in this way to address a difficult topic like Bristol and transatlantic enslavement as a community has value in and of itself. This is a challenging topic for lots of reasons. The reality of the history, its long-lasting legacies, and its recent place within politically driven culture wars of the last few years, to name just a few. And in coming together, valuing everyone's voices, knowledge, and experience, and working towards co-creating new forms of memorialization for our city after old ones had recently come down in quite dramatic ways, has had a constructive and future-orientated and healing value. I don't think we can ignore COVID in all this as well. Our workshops ran in a hybrid online and offline form between November 2021 and May 2022. And so I think there's also a real value in the social and communal aspects of coming together in this way. Thank you.
Thank you so much there, Jessica. Some short reflections, but really meaningful thoughts there about what it's taken to do this. So I'd next love to go to Rebecca, who has been involved as a citizens researcher involved in this project. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about your experiences and a bit about actually kind of what has taking part meant to you.
Yes. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yes?
Yes, we can.
Great. I really resonate with all that Jessica has described, and as participant, as a dancer, so my expertise is dance. But the reason why I joined this project is because I really wanted to go into this subject together with other participants that weren't necessarily dance related, but they had something, we had a common interest towards the subject. And I felt that there was a biodiversity of points of view and of sharing embodied knowledge. I discovered more aspects of myself as a researcher, as a dancer, but also I had the opportunity to unlayer some aspect of history that I wouldn't access otherwise. I think this made me feel inspired, made me discover new skills about how I relate to other people's history. And let me know, I learned about some historical facts, but also the value of the present resonance of historical facts into the people that live in the community of Bristol. So this was a really powerful combination that opened up a lot of questions for me, and a lot of also possibilities to take further this kind of research, but also to, yes, what it means to really explore some aspects of our history that are painful in a hybrid way that includes the biography of people. I think one point I wrote this morning that I felt was really powerful, that in this project I felt inspired, I learned new skills, I shared different understanding, I had new possible, I learned new possible ways of relating both to histories and other people, cultures. And maybe we wouldn't make a change, we cannot change the past, but the process itself was a great process of change. So the change was in the process itself. And so that can impact also what's coming next. And
Thank you so much there, Rebecca. And I love that thought about the idea of change happens through the process. And I think that that's probably something we'll likely pick up on as we get into discussion. So I'd love to hand over now to Mary Annick to put in a little bit of context about how this project has fit within the wider Citizens Researching Together project within Bristol. Mary Annick, would you be able to tell us a little bit more about that and actually what you're learning about overall approaches to researching together with different citizens?
Thank you, Sean. So it was really interesting to actually listen to the previous presentation and also certainly the context that Alice gave, which was really helpful to refocus on our experiences of running the Citizens Researching Together. So so the project itself, we have 4 different strands, and so the one that Jessica has just presented on the decolonizing memory is the first one that we started working on, but we have 4 different strands and different researchers leading these different strands. So there's decolonizing memory, the Bristol Capital of an Enslavement, so looking at where did the money go, bridging history, which is more about social reparative justice, and transformative inclusive pedagogy, so looking at the education and how education can be a factor to actually help addressing some of these challenges. So this is all trying to look at the context of Bristol, a city where its social and cultural life and live experience is shaped by the legacy of the transatlantic slavery, and also the cities itself, how it struggled to address this. And in order to do this is actually the idea of decoding or changing the way we do things. So looking at it differently through different lenses. And so it's looking at the kind of the cultural element in terms of the power dynamic around culture. So we look at, for example, the academia versus communities was one of our first kind of challenge in terms of how we interact with the different groups we're working with, and also the positioning in terms of what is valued as far as knowledge is concerned. So all of this we've covered already in the kind of previous discussions. So for me, some of the key challenges has been really in terms of working with different groups in different ways, understanding that the different citizenship will engage, the different citizen scientists will engage in different ways with a project. And so each of the project has develop a certain relationship to enable full participation of its citizens. And do you want me to go in a little bit in detail in terms of saying how we work together?
I think just a brief introduction of it. Brilliant, Mary Annick, as a way of kind of introduction. Okay,
so for example, the so transformative inclusive pedagogy, for example, we decided to. I want to give the context as well. In Bristol, across Bristol, there is a very active movement in terms of ensuring that participation and contribution is recognized. It's something that is increasingly developing across the city. And also there's this notion of nothing about us without us. It's not a kind of keyword that we will hear. And I guess, Margarita, when you spoke about your examples, this certainly is something that comes through very strongly, nothing about us without us. So the way that we work together is actually developing different engagements. So for some project, we work with partners who are paid partners, as Alice has said already. And we have, in fact, most of the projects, the partners are paid, and almost all the citizen scientists who contributed to the project also have received some kind of recognition. And it's about valuing knowledge and about recognizing that actually knowledge is not just in university and institutions, so working as equal partners. And so that's it in a nutshell in terms of the way we work. I mean, I'm happy to answer more questions more specifically. It is a complex project, so that's why I'm trying to give a lot of information, but actually all of them work together very, very differently.
Thank you so much there, Marianne, and appreciate the complexity of kind of not just describing one citizen science method, but a number working in tangent across a theme, and particularly in the kind of context that you're describing there. So this gives a flavour of the Citizens Researching Together in Bristol project overall. And what I'd love to pick up on kind of Marianne's point there about kind of, as she was listening to the previous project and to Alice, what hopefully this room is getting a flavour of is the rich discussion that's happened within projects, but also across projects as a result of the Collaboration Grants Programme. And as the Institute for Community Studies, we've been running a learning collaboration support programme to help bring some of that thinking together. And we've had the benefit and the real privilege of listening in on some of these conversations and helping to facilitate them. And to move to our next section then, I guess we really wanted to open up the conversation that we've been exposed to through these projects, both individually but also together, about actually what is it meant to do citizen science, but also where are there some of these opportunities and challenges, though, also about doing it well. So with that in mind, I'm going to hand back to my colleague Alice to give us a bit of a flavour back again from the discussion paper that we published last week about what are some of these kind of emerging questions that are emerging from these projects, but also that we'd love to discuss with this room this morning. So Alice, I'll hand back to you.
So yeah, as Sean said, the aim of the discussion paper was really to draw together the collective experiences and common themes emerging through the 5 projects, 2 of which we've heard a bit more about just now, to really create some provocations and prompt lots of discussion across the broader sector. So many people in this room and beyond that have interests and experience of experimenting with methods like this. So some of the key questions emerging were around that question of how do we characterize these different types of participatory research methods. We know that relationships play a central role in their value. So how do relationships characterize different types of methods? We heard about the risks and risky nature of trying to innovate within a precarious system. So we ask whether this sense of risk is inherent to these methods or not, and open up that type of discussion. And we heard about the complex power dynamics within projects. So we ask how can we conceptualize these power relations better in how we understand these types of different methods to involve communities in research. We then look to the institutional and systemic setup of the research and innovation system to ask what more support is needed to invest in the relationships that we heard take so much time and effort to curate and foster, to better reward some of the risks and encourage more innovation and experimentation in research design and methodology, and also how can we address some of those entrenched power imbalances we've heard about. And finally, we looked at some of the broader moral implications of using these types of research methods to drive change across society, and particularly what implications do some of the risky aspects and power dynamics of these methods impose. So I think we should be pasting those in the chat so to sort of help craft the conversation, but I'll pass back to Sian to chair that for us.
So hopefully from the first hour of this morning, we've given you lots to think about in terms of actually what does it mean to do citizen science, the kind of experience from a range of perspectives on that, as well as these big questions that are emerging from what we've seen in these projects, but also looking a bit more broadly about what does it mean to do this work within the wider sector. What we'd love to do at this point is to open up the room a little bit to actually, based on some of those questions that Alice has shared there, what resonates with you and what's been your experience and some of these big questions that we're asking. We're quite a big room, I would say, so I will be doing some gentle work to chair things along. So to get started, do feel free, if you've got particular questions or comments to make, do start to put those in the chat. But to open us up, I'd love to welcome, we have Indy Seera in the room today, who works at Voices of Colour, which is a platform for underrepresented change makers who are unafraid to try and voice their vision of actually how to reach their aspirations. And we recognise that there are a range of potential perspectives that might exist here around actually responding to some of these questions. And so we thought we'd welcome a couple of different viewpoints on this. And I know, Indy, you've been given a sneak peek of this paper, and you might want to share some thoughts today from your perspective, from your work that you've been doing.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I did have a sneak peek, and a lot of the details and insights that have come through really resonate with the work that we're doing on the ground. So I think the biggest element that we've looked into is the role, the power that systemic institutions hold, and how certain knowledges are preserved. And so we have been doing some work with peer researchers around health inequalities in the borough in London. And what really sticks out is how certain knowledge and systemic structures are still being, I guess, in a sense, preserved. And to have peer researchers and those with lived experience living within those communities to have an influence in terms of challenging that knowledge per se, but also in a sense highlighting the value that it should hold in terms of the preconceived notions of what is accepted as knowledge, and in a sense challenging those power dynamics. And I think the paper really, in a sense, highlights how, when it comes to even terminology that's used, and what that means, and how it can also be a way of gatekeeping residents and local individuals from actually accessing information, knowledge, and influencing that, plays a huge role. And so it's, in a sense, highlighting everything that we're seeing on the ground, especially with our work around health inequalities and understanding what that means, especially for marginalized communities that don't really get engaged with traditionally or asked their experiences in their communities. So yeah, I think a lot has come out of it, and it's, in a sense, justifying the need for this approach and how helpful it is, and actually the wider impact it can have, you know, on livelihoods at the end of the day, and how policies are shaped.
Thank you very much there, Indy. And we're glad that it's resonating a little bit with you, but we also we do recognise that some of the things that we probably shared this morning, for those of us that work day in, day out in participatory research, it might resonate strongly. It might be things that you've talked and thought a lot about before. But I guess the value in having a conversation like this, we hope, is that it helps to, as you say, kind of crystallise some of those thinking on what does it mean that we do next. So thank you, Indy. What I'm going to do at this stage is open up to the room to see what are some of your perspectives. Does what we've shared this morning resonate with you? Is there something else you'd like to kind of highlight about this idea of the experience as citizen scientists? Is there anything else you'd like to hear a little bit more about from what we've shared so far? So I guess if we can, if you want to put your hand up, if you've got something that you want to say, and then I'll bring people in, and feel free at that stage to come off mute. To get a sense of the scale of the room, I have to go through 5 pages of different names. So it might take me a little bit of time just to look in the room and see who's here. Brilliant. And Brennan, do you want to come in?
I was there straight up with my hand up. I work in public engagement for the Centre for Medical Mycology in Exeter, and also at the University of Manchester for the Manchester Fungal Infection Group. What I'm finding is that these projects are fantastic. Everybody loves them, but researchers don't have the time. It's not embedded in their sort of research proposals, and people are really struggling to figure out how this research can fit into their already sort of very, very stretched sort of days. And also you mentioned some of the like administrative issues. Just the simple act of paying somebody for their time. If you're up against a major institution like a university, we all know how complex that can be. And also then you're dealing with people with might be on benefits, that has an impact. So I think we'd all love to do these projects, but it's the how do we do them? How do we find that time? How do we encourage researchers to actually take on these projects when they're already so stretched?
Thank you very much, Anne, for sharing that perspective. And also, always fantastic as a chair to have someone immediately put their hand up and be like, I want to speak. So thank you for that. I think what you've raised there is looking around this room and also wider sector, there's no shortage of willingness to do this, but I guess the complexity is in those barriers about actually in the practice, how do we get that to work around some of the logistics, etc. And what I'll say is we will be sharing more about some of those challenges that you've mentioned as part of later discussion papers within the series. But I'd love to maybe use that as a bit of a starting point to think, actually, well, does that resonate with others in the room? Anything you want to kind of add or build off Andrew's point, or to raise a different point that's raised by some of the thinking that we've added into the room this morning? Bryony.
Oh yeah, thank you. That was so interesting. Yeah, I also work in public engagement for a bioinformatics institute, and there's a really valuable point. I think a lot of our scientists and kind of group leaders want to include public engagement and citizen science engagement. The question they often ask is, well, how much time should I put into the grant? How much money is it going to cost? And because of the lovely, messy, unknown approach, which is great because you don't have those kind of predefined outcomes and you don't have metrics that you're definitely going to hit, it's hard to kind of fit that lovely, messy approach into a strict scientific grant application. I think it looks like funding is changing. Like I've seen a lot of grants like this one and like the NERT grant that came out, where they kind of give you a stage 1 pot of money to do some exploratory funding. But I think until that becomes the process more widely, we're going to keep getting these questions. I don't know if anyone else's experience is similar.
From the hands going up, I think potentially so, Bryony. You raise a really interesting point, particularly on these kind of projects. If we're genuinely going to work together with citizens, there is a degree of unknowns that we have about actually how it's going to work in practice, and how, when we're writing these types of proposals and grants processes, do we give clarity that we know what we're doing, because we do, but also that there needs to be a degree of finding things out as we go. And I can see comments coming in on the chat as well that echo that. Roland, you had your hand also straight up. I'm not sure if that was in relation to Bryony's comment, but I'll come to you next.
Okay, thanks. It's a two-pronged thing. One is, yes, about, trying to find the funding for such work, because we don't fit nicely into funding streams, either in terms of academic funding or possibly in terms of kind of more general social funding, because some of the things that we're interested in and trying to look at are what I kind of term what if. What if there was a project doing X, Y, and Z? What would that look like? How might it be organized and things like that? So the speculative research, which can produce really exciting stuff in really exciting ways, is sometimes quite hard to get off the ground. The other element is, and it may just be where we're based. We're based in Norwich, in Norfolk, and in the brief time that we have been set up since 2021, we have found that the moment we start saying we want to do some community-based research, usually social science-based, and it's going to cut across every boundary that you know about. The academics have a fit of the vapors, but also the local politicians suddenly become very active and want to colonize the work so that they can present it as being within their particular idea frame. So those two issues, the funding and the power relationship between entrenched interest groups, I think for us are they're realities, and they're what we have to negotiate on a daily basis. And a lot of my time is spent trying to explain to people that we're not creating a focus group, we're not creating a monster survey, that we are simply going out, making contact with people on the streets and asking them, do you want to get involved in this? And if so, how can we make that look something like, something that might be acceptable to an bunch of academics?
Thank you very much there for sharing that, Roland. I could see some nods around the room when we talked about kind of politics and politicians there. But also one of the kind of themes that's been highlighted in the paper is around, in a way, the responsibility that then sits with those that are convening this type of research to do it well. And I guess the opportunity of that, but also the challenges of it too. I'm going to go vaguely what I think in the order of hands that have been raised. I think, Amanda, you are next.
Hello. So I'm part of a team who's 1 year into a 5-year NIHR funded citizen science program into eczema. And the first year has been a complete blast, I have to say, because I'm just a patient. It's been fabulous. But the two things that have come out of it for me have been trying to arrange, you touched on it a little bit, trying to arrange times which are suitable for the researchers and the clinicians, and also suitable for patients who have real lives and actually are doing other things during the working day. And that has been really difficult. It's sustainable for a year, but for 5 years, it's kind of, anyway. So that's one problem. And the other thing, if you don't mind me jumping in and saying, is my concern is legacy, because we are enabling wonderful groups of people to really to understand and to be really involved in research, and all the things that go with it. But at the end of the 5 years, we've got these people who we potentially just going to dump, and that feels very wrong. So sorry, that's me over and out. Sorry.
No, don't apologise at all. You have raised two very important issues there to do with, actually, if we are going to genuinely commit to involving people, how do we work in ways that work for them, and what does it take to do that? But absolutely that question of impact and sustained legacy. Once you've engaged people, what's the responsibility you hold to keeping them involved? But also, how do we do that? Brilliant, thank you so much there. I might come on to Suzanne next.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I can't get my, oh, yeah. I was very interested. Thank you so much for everyone who gave sort of backgrounds on their projects. And I'm just a research scientist and epidemiologist, just starting a new project, and we're just trying to use public engagement to get input for our study and for designing a questionnaire. So I just wanted to know, for some of the people who gave presentations, what were the challenges with recruiting participants, and how did you go about it, and how did you overcome those challenges? Because I'm at that stage now with trying to recruit, and any tips would be really useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much there, Suzanne, for that question. So I'd like to bring back in, I guess, our speakers from our two projects. And I'll leave it to them who feels they're best placed to answer those questions. I guess Ben or Margarita, or Marianic and Jessica. We'll ask for a response from each project, if that's okay. Feel free to come off mute. It's like a game of blinking here to see who's going to go first. Jessica, you've come off mute.
Yeah,
I'll go to you.
I don't mind having a go. Yeah, recruitment's a really important issue. I think for us, with the Decolonising Memory project, it was important to try and find where people were already sort of talking about these sorts of things, where there was already a sense of interest. And partner on the project, Cleo Lake, was really important in this because she's invested, already sort of connected into those communities, already doing this kind of work, had dance networks. So I think for us already sort of having a project that was co-led by both academic and community partners and was equal from the beginning really helped with recruitment. I don't want to make it sound like a wholly entirely kind of fluid and I don't know, entirely successful kind of process either. I think we had a huge turnout for the first workshop and it sort of quickly dropped off after that. And I think that's also quite a common kind of, sort of way that it works out with collaborative projects. You start off with lots of interest and then people have their own lives, they have other commitments, other things going on. And we had, 7 workshops. It was quite a commitment. And I think what we ended up with was a kind of core of, even though kind of we had approaching 30 people in that first workshop, we had a core of under 10 really that kind of came back for every workshop. But there's something quite valuable in that smaller kind of group as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much there for sharing that, Jessica. I'll just look over at the homes team. Ben, do you want to come in?
Yeah, and Margarita can chip in as well if I've missed something out. So one thing I'd suggest is not trying to recreate the wheel with the engagement process. And there are a lot of communities and community groups who engage within specific demographics already. So if you've got a particular cohort that you're trying to engage with, there may be people working in that space already. So for example, we had the Bristol Green Capital Partnership, who are wonderful and work with groups right across Bristol who we were able to work with to facilitate recruitment. As Margarita pointed out earlier, it wasn't wholly successful in terms of who we wanted to reach and who participated completely. But there will be community groups that you may be able to reach like that. So don't feel that there's a big pressure to, as I say, recreate what's already happening in the communities that you might try to engage with.
And just to add to what Ben said, I think there's no problem in reaching out to your professional and personal networks. So within homes, as Ben said before, in the pilot, we were really keen in involving highly engaged citizens, people that had a considerable chunk of time that they could dedicate to the project. And what we did was exactly that. We contacted our friends, family, colleagues to see if they were interested in taking part in the pilot. And that worked really well for us because we were able to recruit the number of people we needed for the pilot quite quickly. And those people were able to dedicate the time that we needed for the project. So in that sense, sometimes piloting things with a smaller number of people that you know personally or professionally might bring out barriers and challenge that otherwise you wouldn't. And yeah, it worked really well for us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both, all of you, for those comments there. Now, we've got new hands up in the room, and what I'm trying to work out is if these are hands with different questions or responses to the question of recruitment. So those of you that have hands up at the moment, if your question is about or a comment about recruitment, can you keep your hand up? And if not, could you put them down momentarily? Okay, brilliant. So Catherine, I might come to you.
Hi everyone. I'm just checking that you mean me because it might be Kathy and not Catherine. Is that?
Oh, yeah, okay. No, I mean you.
That's okay.
Great.
Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Kathy Southworth from the University of Edinburgh and Edinburgh Bioquarter. And insofar as recruitment, one of the things that we find is often that researchers ask us about helping them, facilitating them with the communities local to us who we work with as part of our community impact. But often this is kind of like a quick in and out, and it often makes us feel a little bit uncomfortable that the communities are being asked to take part in these projects in a kind of, I suppose it just feels as though there's not being any preparatory work and that they don't particularly leave a legacy. And I think that's just a recognition of the landscape at the moment. And I actually wondered if anyone had any experience or examples of projects that have worked where what we can do is, because we've got the opportunity where we are to work with the communities over a long term, is to sort of develop a fertile ground for research participation, given that our local communities are high up on the Scottish Index for multiple deprivation, so we could work with people through their live course to develop that relationship with research, so that so that the ground is there for when people want to take part, and it doesn't feel as kind of abrupt as often it is now. So I'd be more than happy to hear anyone's experiences of that.
A really kind of important reflection there, kind of, Kathy, thank you. What I'll do is I'll ask people on that kind of question, do put in the chat your examples, and if we've got time, we'll do a roundup of what's emerged in the chat. Ronnie, I'm going to come to you.
Oops, sorry, I was looking at my note for a second there. I was going to say something else in terms of a question, but I think it picks up on what we were talking about. If you thinking about involving people and getting people involved, I think it's relevant to that as well, because I was thinking a lot of the conversation that had gone before was quite structural stuff, and actually I think so from my point of view, in terms of getting involved with a project, I think there's something about thinking how you show what the value of the input is. If you show the value of the input that somebody's making, and the benefit of that involvement in the research, and how the outcome is going to be better as a result of that involvement, that's a really critical part that I think wasn't being touched on. And then from that, I think how you then use that to communicate out how beneficial it has. That's good for everybody if you see how beneficial that involvement has been in terms of justifying that element of that aspect of input into the project. And I think there's a point there about how you turn the theoretical into something tangible, because actually you're not necessarily involved in the theoretical part in terms of your input as in participatory research. I think there's an element of saying, actually, and what this means is, and that also helps with that thing about withdrawal, or if you go quickly into a community to ask about an input, you can demonstrate back, it finishes something better if you say, as a result of this, that your input means this happened, your input means we know this, and that puts a line underneath that level of involvement. So I think it was just
really helpful reflections there, Ronnie, in terms of thinking actually about moving beyond the kind of theoretical. And I've noted the hands up in the room already, but I'd love at this stage to bring in a colleague of ours, Asma Al-Said, who's been a peer researcher, community researcher, working on a project happening in Southampton, to talk a little bit about actually some of her experiences working as a peer researcher. So welcome to the room, Asma. And it'd be great if you could feel able to talk a little bit about kind of some of your experience of doing research, and actually kind of from those experiences that you've had, how does that compare to some of the kind of conversations that we're having this morning? And I guess, yeah, your experience of kind of the benefits of these types of approaches. Asma, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, hi everyone. I just want to mention that about the recruiting first, that the recruiting was in my project was very challenging, but I had so many ups and downs while I was looking for participants to do interviews with me. I faced a lot of no's, but in my experience, I just want to tell you all, guys, like, you need to keep up doing what you need to do, and at the end you will find someone to recruit, and you will do your research. And at first I was skeptical about this. I didn't feel like I can do it, but at the end we did it. And I just want to share my experience with you today. During my experience as a peer researcher, actually, I had the invaluable opportunity to engage with a research project focused on vaccine hesitancy. during COVID, particularly with ethnic minorities communities. This experience profoundly impacted me both professionally and personally, shedding light on the complex issues interplay of factors influencing vaccine perceptions and the decision within these communities. Working directly with individuals from diverse ethnic backgrounds allowed me to witness the multifaceted nature of vaccine hesitancy. Through in-depth interviews and focus groups discussion, I engaged with community members, understanding their concerns, beliefs, and their reservations regarding vaccination. The conversations actually revealed the importance of culture, competence, and tailored communication in addressing vaccine hesitancy effectively. On personal level, this experience enhanced my empathy and culture sensitivity. Engaging with individuals from various cultural backgrounds underscored the necessity of an inclusive and respectful approach in research. It broadened my understanding of the importance and cultural context when designing public health campaigns and communication strategies. And I have seen today the discussion papers. They all wonderful, and I think we share striking similarities primarily in their collaborative and participatory nature, fostering diverse perspective and innovating solutions. We both like, I'm just very excited. We both in phase with the same approach involving individuals from diverse backgrounds, experiences, and expertise. We encourage contribution from various stakeholders, including ethnic minorities and citizens, reflecting similar issues and inclusivity seen in projects involving peer researchers. I think we both too seek to capture a wide range of perspective. Peer researchers often drawn from the demographic being studied, contribute insights unique to their lived experience, mirroring the aim of research to incorporate diverse voices, enabling a richer understanding of the topic discussed. I think we both the discussion paper and the peer research underscored the importance of engaging with communities, whether through peer research, interacting with the communities itself, or other ways of engaging with a broader audience. Both processes actively seek a community involvement to inform discussion and decisions. Yeah, I think that's it. I hope you all the success in your research papers, and I wish all the people who didn't finish their project, I'm sure you will do it and you will get there. Believe me, believe me. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much there, Asma. And don't apologise at all about getting excited about citizen science. I think we've heard a lot of interest and passion from the room today about the kind of methods and mechanisms. So thank you for sharing your perspective on how the approach has worked for you. I'll go back out to the room to see hands that are already up again about sharing kind of your perspective. And Melissa, you've had your hand up for a while.
Hi there. This has been so interesting, and just hearing everybody's perspectives. I'm sat behind my screen being like, yes, because this resonates so much with everything that I've been experiencing. So for context, I've just completed my PhD at the University of Leeds, and my project was a participatory project working with adults with learning disabilities. And one of the things that I am really interested in is kind of looking at participatory research, and how when I look at these different projects, that I can see quite a lot of kind of selective involvement, where we might have some stages of the research where community partners are involved with quite heavily, and perhaps other stages of research that perhaps community partners are not involved with as much. And I can see some discussion in the chat about research output. And I guess one of my thoughts has been, how do we ensure that community partners are involved in the output of the project, when quite often academic institutions or organisations are kind of the gatekeepers of what constitutes as a research output, in terms of, for example, if a lot of my co-researchers don't read or write, then putting together a co-produced journal article is going to be quite difficult. I don't know if anybody has any experience of trying to challenge this. I have attempted to contact some journals in my field. I've been trying to ask for accessible summaries, which, if you're not familiar, are just kind of some bullet points at the top. They're not even particularly accessible, to be honest with you. They're more accessible, but they're not the answer in terms of the long term. And they said no, basically. So I'm really interested in if anybody has any experiences of trying to tackle some of these pre-established systems that prevent people from contributing to those outputs, because we essentially gave up with journals and now we're creating a comic book instead, which is all wonderful. But we want to be in those spaces as well, because I think that's also how we increase representation. So if anyone has any thoughts, I'd be really interested.
Thank you so much for that, Melissa. And again, I'd open up, if you've got any responses to Melissa's question there, do put them in the chat and we'll take a look through. But I'll come over to Al at this point as well, in case that was an extra question or a response to kind of Melissa's comment.
It was a response to Melissa, because it's been my entire experience as well. I've done a lot of participatory work with people with learning disabilities, and actually one of the things was not devaluing the way in which actually the communication and the communications, different range of communication needs that people have. So it is the hard thing of almost producing multiple formats of outputs for different audiences, but having a balance of those, because I think there's a thing around people wanting to rightly be really proud and share within their community the work that they've done, and that can be transformative in its own way. I think there is also that focus on policy and practice, and so you have different kind of audience needs there. And then there is also the established ways in which production of journal articles or conference papers, and it takes more resource. But I think the thing of actually acknowledging that change will only happen if you speak to a multitude of different audiences in a way in which that honors how people communicate. And that was how I kind of felt very much, that if we were going to produce a peer-reviewed paper and it was read by 3 people, compared to we put up videos on YouTube, or we produced practitioner guidance that went into transport providers' ongoing training, there were different ways of starting to say that impact and that change needs to happen through a multitude of routes. But if you wanted to carry on the conversation at all, more than happy to follow up, because it is a really important area, dissemination.
Thank you very much there, Al. And I should say that Al is our Director of Research here at the Young Foundations and with the Institute of Community Studies. I'll be sharing details later on about how to stay in touch if you have any further questions or in need of inspiration or connection to others working in this sector. So I'm mindful that we're close to the time where we're going to move you into breakout rooms for further discussion, but I'll just check around the room to see if there's anyone else that kind of wants to raise any points widely in the open here. And I guess particularly looking at, there is an absolute stream of consciousness and wonderful thoughts happening here on the chat. So if there's anyone that's kind of put comments in the chat or asked questions in it that would like to raise their hand and to mention a comment they've made out loud, very much welcome your thoughts. Bryony?
Sorry. Yeah, it's just a thought about like, we know that the funding structure we kind of work in is very kind of specific and time limited. And I think the thing I found for community engagement work is that it needs to be open-ended, and it needs to be about kind of that ongoing relationship. It's not necessarily about the specific project you're going to do. It's about looking for opportunities where you can work together. And I guess the issue is that because our funding is so often time limited, it kind of drives towards an end point. So I think we're quite fortunate in that we have an element of core funding, so we can kind of keep those relationships going along and then seek specific funding for kind of bigger or more focused things. I appreciate not everyone's in that kind of situation, so I don't know how that can change. I guess it's part of the wider valuing and embedding engagement and community engagement in institutions, so they set aside a bit of core funding, not just for public engagement or community engagement professional, but for delivering some of the work as well, so that you're not always chasing money, spending loads of time doing that, whilst trying to maintain these kind of relational connections and supporting your researchers. Yeah, it's more just of a random thought than anything particularly problem solving.
No, thank you there, Bryony. And I guess, the value of having this room is that putting out perspectives, even if we don't quite necessarily have the answer, the value in kind of stating it. Sarah, I'm going to come to you.
Thanks. Yeah, just picking up on Bryony's point just there, I think the core funding, so I speak from a researcher point of view, and I think that the core funding to allow researchers, whether you're in academic institutions or other research institutions, is so important, because a lot of the things that have been said on screen today, but also in the chat screen about kind of how to appropriately involve people in the co-creation of research projects, how to talk to people about what their desires are and make sure that their needs are being met by the research project, and not feeling that this is kind of like, they're just like, community researchers on demand and some sort of very extractive process, making sure that like the researchers who are involved in those institutions have the time to properly communicate with participants about the project, about the kind of messiness and the chaos that participatory research can be. And that can be really disorientating for people, actually, both the researchers and community participants. And core funding to allow people the time after the project's ended to keep those relationships ongoing and be like, oh, well, you participated in this project. Hey, I've got a whole load more, which you might also be interested in. And also to have the time to do those outputs. So for researchers, often it's really important for them that they have those kind of peer-reviewed publications, but that is not at all an accessible way of communicating. Even for researchers, like that's very, they're often not accessible. But as I can't remember who it was, somebody said in the chat screen, you've also often got to be doing these kind of the research publications, the peer-reviewed publications, alongside all these much more accessible methods. And where does that fit into? Well, often that fits into your evenings and weekends, and that's not appropriate either. And so I think that core funding is really important, and I don't know how we overcome that, but definitely needed.
Thank you very much there, Sarah, for your thoughts and perspectives. They're really valued put out. There's been quite a few, I guess, kind of questions here about kind of relating to funding and how we structure such programs. I'm aware of your last sentence there, Sarah, sets up a question that we might not be able to quite answer today. But I did at this stage kind of want to bring in our colleague, Jen Grove, who's within the UKRI public engagement team, who's been the leading point of contact for this programme within UKRI. And as we've been hearing from some of the projects and some of the chats, that's happening, UKRI have been working really differently with these series of projects to think about what we can learn from this type of way of working and what it takes to do it well. And Jen, I'd love to bring you in at this stage just to talk a little bit more about that process and what this programme's meant for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Sean. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Brilliant, thank you. And yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for being here today and taking part, and all of your conversations and comments in the discussion and in the chat. So yeah, I just wanted to say a couple of really brief things before we give you the opportunity to move on to the breakout rooms. So I think, yeah, as Sean said, I'm Jen, and I work in the public engagement team in UKRI, and we've been working with the Institute for Community Studies to deliver the support for the projects, the collaboration grants, as they've moved through their journey. And as you might know, UKRI, as part of our new strategy, we have an ambition to break down the barriers between research, innovation, and wider society, is how we've put it, but also an ambition around valuing more diverse forms of knowledge within research and innovation. So I think you can kind of see how the collaboration grants fit in there. We also have a dedicated new public engagement strategy, which you can have a look at online. We'll put some links up if you haven't seen it. And that really has this commitment to support engagement with the public right across a range of different methods, including participatory research, And there's a big thread within that around diversifying and thinking about how we can particularly engage with underrepresented groups and communities with research and innovation. So again, very much speaks to what we've been talking about today. So you might have noticed I haven't said anything really much apart from a couple of comments in the chat today. So really, I've been here as a funder just to listen and take in what everyone's been saying. And that's really kind of indicative of the way we've been trying to work with the projects throughout the collaboration grant support package. So the programme for us has been such an important way of gathering insights into how we can, as funders, do better in supporting this way of working. And it's already been feeding into, for example, that new public engagement strategy that I mentioned and other work that we've been doing. So we, as you know, has been mentioned, we have this cohort of projects who have been sharing together, but they've also been sharing with us. And that means that we've asked them to be quite honest about their progress. So not just their successes, but also the challenges that they faced in their projects, and particularly as well, those many challenges in the barriers in the system that we've talked about today. So just wanted to kind of give a thank you to the projects for trusting that process and being so open and honest with us as funders, because appreciate that's not always the kind of relationship that people have had with funders. So as I say, all of this is feeding into our wider work at UKRI. Part of that is work around research culture and the kind of culture change that we're trying to enable across the sector to address some of those barriers that we've talked about. But there's also a lot of internal work that's going on at UKRI as well. So thinking about how we can better enable researchers to work with the public, work with communities. So, you know, some of those funds have already been mentioned on the chat today, other kind of citizen science and participatory research funds, for example, from Research England, from EPSRC, lots of different things that are going on across the organisation. But also thinking about things like legacy funding, sustainability, things that have been mentioned today. How can we support not just projects, but outside of project-based kind of output-driven work. And the other piece is thinking about how we can also fund communities directly to work to work with researchers and to lead their own research. So not just funding universities, but how can we give money directly to community groups to do their own, lead their own research. And we've a blog that we've just put out on our approach to that, which again, we can share in the chat. So lastly, I'll just say the last sort of piece of the puzzle is the work that we're doing internally to try and think about how to embed this this kind of support into our standard grants, into our responsive mode grants or other types of funding. So it's not so that people can access funding and support for doing participatory research embedded within other types of, the types of standard grants that they might be applying for. So that's around, issues we've talked about, paying people, about assessment of those applications. And that's another kind of internal piece of work that we're trying to do at the moment. So we'll be sharing more about our perspective as a funder on what we've learned from this programme in the coming sort of communications and parts of the series that are coming out that ICS are coordinating. And I think Sian's going to tell you a bit more about that too. So I just wanted to say thanks very much to Sian and Alice as well and ICS for organising this event. Cheers.
Thank you very much there, Jen. And your spot in the chat, the number of the CSCG projects commenting on how well received that type of openness has been in this programme. And for those reference points that were mentioned there in terms of the public engagement strategy, but also that blog there around looking at how to fund community-led research and innovation, the links are in the chat, but we'll also circulate these after this call. So at this stage, we've had an amazing set of perspectives and rich conversations so far. But whenever we host a session like this, we're really mindful of all the perspectives that are in the room and the rich insight that sits within all of your heads and about the experiences that you have in doing participatory research. So with that in mind, we'd love to open up our doors slightly to give you some time together in smaller groups to talk about what this has meant to you and to get a little bit more into conversation. Likewise, if we weren't running this online, and if we were opening up instead kind of our building, you might have a chat around the tea table, you might have a chat going into the kitchen. So think about a little bit like that in little breakout rooms. So with that in mind, Alice, if you're able to share your screen on the conversational menu. Brilliant. So we hope that today's conversation so far has given you lots to think and talk about. But just in case, and we'll add this into the chat, we'll give you a little bit of a kind of some prompts that you might want to talk about as we put you into little breakout rooms with about, say, 4 or 5 or so other people for the next 12 minutes, dare I say. I'm going to make sure I keep us to time and let you go at 12 o'clock. So these are really just questions that have been kind of raised by our initial presentations, but also some of the themes that have come out from discussion so far. So on those kind of 3 areas that the discussion paper raised, on relational experiences, what more is needed to invest in relationships, which we've heard is so important, and what can be best enabled in funding and research design to do this. Thinking about effective experiences, we've talked here before about how risk and innovation happens within citizen science, but actually how can it better be rewarded within the research and innovation system? And what institutions need to do to support researchers to do that, and how to participate within participatory research? And in terms of the final area around powerful experiences, how can research and innovation systems address entrenched power imbalances that we've talked about a little bit today so far? And are universities in an appropriate environment for some of that to take place? Big questions, but hopefully gives you food for thought as we move you into small discussion rooms before we then come back all together to give some final reflections, and also we will talk about our next steps, how to stay involved and what is next in the series. So I think by the magic of Zoom, we might be all whisked away shortly into some breakout rooms, and we will see you back shortly after a chance to talk with some of your peers. Okay. Brilliant. Okay, thank you so much for coming back. I always feel like we have to apologise whenever we kind of close a breakout room, because it usually cuts somebody off mid-flow through a brilliant comment. But hopefully we've given you some time to discuss and think further about the questions raised within the papers today. So just to bring this session to a close, and I'm mindful of making sure that we do stick to 12 o'clock as our final point for today's session. I just really wanted to reflect and say thank you to our speakers and those that have shared their perspectives today. You've really provided such rich and interesting conversations about what it means to do citizen science and from your experiences. And just to give a little bit of a flavour of that, Alice, if you're able to share your screen. We asked you to previously have a little look at putting in 3 words that helped reflect your experience of doing citizen science. And so in the background, the Menti tool has been doing its thing and bringing together some of the kind of key things that have come up from it. And I think what's really interesting and what's been kind of coming out so far is those words of just centered in the middle there of exciting, challenging, collaborative, rewarding, and learning and complex, which in a way I think do quite a lot of justice to some of the conversations that we've had today, which is, oh, it's moving again, is that actually there's a lot of huge value that comes from doing citizen science, but it also takes getting it right. And to do that, sometimes there are challenges in doing that. And I guess where we're really interested in today's conversation, but also conversations that we're hoping to convene over the coming months, is what can make that a bit easier, and what does it take to do it well, and also how we can support each other to do that. So do keep adding in your experiences. They're adding all the time there. And to say, I'll say, Alice, if we stop sharing your screen now, although I could probably watch that all morning, pointing around and adding to it, is that today's conversation has been incredibly rich. So what we will be doing as part of our next steps is we will write a bit of a summary of today's conversation, as well as share links to all the kind of the outputs that have been shared in the chat today to bring back to this group, including the presentations, links to the papers, etc. To help with that, we'd really be interested in, we've heard from some of you today, unfortunately we haven't been able to hear from everybody. We'd love to hear if you'd like to put in the chat as a final thought, what's your key takeaway from today's session, and one thing that you've learnt from the conversation. So we'll give you kind of a couple of minutes to put in that kind of your takeaway personally into the chat that you've gained from this conversation. So just on our next steps then, they've been alluded to a little bit there by Jen earlier. So yeah, do put in the chat your one thing, and if we go to the next slide, Alice, thank you. So we will be sharing what we've learned from this session, but there is also more to come. So we will be hosting, as the ICS, a Citizen Researcher Forum on the 28th of November in the evening, which is a further chance for members of communities and the public, if you've been involved in a citizen science project or a pastoral research project and want to talk about your experience and what it's meant to you, as well as some of the kind of the challenges and opportunities that come with that. We're hosting a session to be involved in that in November. After this event, we'll share links of how to get involved and how to sign up, and do feel free to share it with citizen researchers that you have been working with as part of your projects, if you've been facilitating other projects. So we've alluded to that this is really what we hope is a start of opening up a conversation about the experience here of talking about citizen science. And so we have 3 other discussion papers to come over the coming months. Our next one will be on ethics for citizen science, a really interesting and tricky and novelty topic, which actually has also been alluded to in the chat as we've gone through. So we're busily away working on that paper with the projects that have been involved in the collaboration grant programme, and so we'll be looking to share that later in the year. Our other papers will focus on partnerships. So part of the aspect of the collaboration grants has been working with partnerships with other organisations. What does it take to do that well? But also impact as well, will be our final paper in this discussion series, reflecting on what it takes to tell the story of the value of citizen science, the methods associated, but also picking up on some of the topics that we mentioned today around legacy, sustainability, and what it takes to end well. So look out for those further discussion series and events associated with them. And I will say we've been really pleased to hear from 2 of the projects that have been involved in the collaboration grants process today. And thank you so much to both of you for sharing your stories. But we will also have opportunities to hear from our other collaboration grant projects as well as part of this series. So stay tuned. Many of the other projects have been in the room today adding their thoughts and perspectives. And we really value and welcome all of their open and honesty about kind of their experience as part of this programme. And then finally, while we'll send an update email sharing all the kind of links from this session, do stay involved as part of other ways of having a conversation about participatory research through the Institute for Community Studies and the Young Foundation. So you can visit any stage our Citizen Science Hub that's on the Institute website, which shares a range of different stories and perspectives as part of the Citizen Science programme, and from other events as well. So that's your first stopping point for more information about the programme, but also from the papers and outputs from it. But also do sign up for the Young Foundation's Peer Research Network, which is a network that brings together both those involved in designing citizen science programmes, but also peer researchers themselves, and aims to help share knowledge and perspectives about participatory research and help to grow the sector. So that is a really good stopping point for if you're looking to connect with others undertaking similar practice, where to go for more information, support, training and perspectives. And again, we'll share links of how to sign up for that at the end of this session. So really, that just brings me to the end, hopefully right on 12 o'clock, to say thank you so much for joining us this morning for what has been a really valuable session from our perspective, sharing and thinking about what it means to do citizen science. We hope you have a good rest of your days. Thank you for joining us, and do sign up for future events.